My name's Carter Coleman. I'm the Director of Business Development, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's recording of our OKRs webinar. How Sears drives execution, productivity, and accountability with OKRs. Let's take a look at the people who attended this webinar. The organization size, the number of employees. About 54% of them are with companies under 50 employees. 12% with employees of 51 to 499, and 34% with over 500 employees. And who's using OKRs? Well, 53% are not using, and 47% are. If you do have questions, please email me, carter@okrs.com, and join the Twitter conversation, hashtag SHCOKRS. Let's have a brief review of the agenda for today. Why you need OKRs, 2 key challenges organizations face. OKRs overview. Keynote, how Sears drives execution, productivity, and accountability with OKRs. And then certainly a Q&A. And now our first speaker is Paul Niven. Paul is a consultant, author, and noted speaker on the subjects of strategy and performance management. He works with organizations large and small in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. His clients include Anheuser-Busch, Panasonic, Ingram Micro, and the U.S. Navy. Paul has written 5 books on strategy and strategy execution, which have been translated into over 15 languages. In addition to consulting and writing, he has delivered keynote addresses on strategy and performance management in cities around the world. Without further ado, here's Paul.
Thank you very much, Carter, and thanks to all of you for listening. I'd like to briefly discuss 2 challenges that virtually all organizations today face. 2 challenges that I believe drive the need for a system like OKRs, and they are employee engagement, or the lack thereof, as we'll discover in just a moment, and the difficulty organizations face in executing strategy. Let's begin with employee engagement. Every year, Deloitte puts out a report, a human capital report, and in their 2015 version, they noted that engagement is the most important challenge overall. In fact, the percentage of respondents citing engagement as a very important issue nearly doubled from 26 to 50%. So clearly organizations see this as vital. What exactly is engagement? Because it's not employee happiness, and it's not employee satisfaction. Kevin Kruse, author of a book called Engagement 2.0, defines engagement as the emotional commitment an employee has to the organization and its goals. And this emotional commitment means engaged employees actually care about their work and the company. They don't work just for a salary or for a promotion that will bring them up to the next rung of the corporate ladder, but they work on behalf of the organization's goals. And when employees care, when they really are engaged, they use what we call discretionary effort. A very simple example, think of an engaged retail clerk who picks up a piece of trash off the store floor, even if the boss isn't looking. Again, that's a very simple example, but it does indicate someone that is clearly giving that discretionary effort to the organization. Unfortunately, the engagement numbers here in the United States and around the world are dismally low. Gallup reports that only 13% of the global workforce is highly engaged, and about 30% here in the United States. And this produces a real cost. Ayers reports that low engagement costs about $17,000 per employee per year in lost productivity, absenteeism, quality defects, etc. But I believe there may be an even bigger cost, and that is a lack of strategy execution in organizations. Look at the very interesting survey noted at the top of this page. More than 400 global CEOs found that exceptional execution was the #1 challenge facing corporate leaders in Asia, Europe, and the United States, heading a list of some 80 issues including innovation, geopolitical instability, and top-line growth. Well, let's pause for 1 second and say, what exactly is execution? Well, execution means organizations are able to achieve the goals they set forth in their strategic plan. And the estimates of organizations actually do that vary, but they're not very encouraging. Best case, about 25 to 35% of organizations execute. Worst case, only 10%, 1 in 10 organizations. So why can't we execute? Well, another survey suggests, or studies suggest, that only about 5% of the typical workforce understands the strategy. And of course, you can't execute something you don't understand. So why is strategy understanding so low? A number of reasons. Poor communication of strategy is a big problem. Often the strategy of an organization is created at the C level. The executives get together, they work out the strategy, but they never share it, and it's never disseminated, so people at lower levels of the organization, of course, can't act upon it, can't make proper decisions because they don't really understand the strategy. Another issue is poor measurement systems that don't track what really matters for success, and that's where OKRs come in. When implemented effectively, OKRs can do several things for an organization. They, of course, can provide visibility into the strategy because OKRs are based or translated on from the organization's goals. OKRs promote alignment. Groups within the organization develop their own OKRs to show their unique contribution to overall goals and strategy execution. A real benefit of OKRs is that they help us keep score, show us how we're actually doing, which is critical to driving engagement. And a lot of studies are showing, especially with the millennial generation, they want fast feedback. They want to know how they're doing. So this component of keeping score on a frequent basis is very critical. Put all of those together, in visibility into the strategy, promotion of alignment, keeping score, and you've got a system that really does help you drive strategy execution and increase engagement. So let's learn just a little bit about OKRs, and for that I'm very pleased to turn to my colleague, Ben Lamorte. Ben coaches business leaders to define and make measurable progress on their most important goals. He's helped hundreds of managers draft and refine their OKRs across dozens of organizations, from startups to the Fortune 100 around the world. Ben currently has clients based in London, Paris, Berlin, Denmark, the United States, and Canada. And according to one Sears Holdings Company executive, Ben is the global leader in OKRs coaching. So it's my privilege to introduce Ben. Ben, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much, Paul. And I guess I want to start off by just saying, when people come up to me and say, how long does it take to do OKRs? The question just doesn't really make sense to me, given that OKRs is really a critical thinking framework. It's an ongoing discipline. So the goal is not to be done with OKRs. Rather, it's more like a continuous improvement program. And it's simply put a way of getting better and more effective at work. And in a sense, in its essence, OKRs are simply objectives, right? The O is the objective. It's a statement of a broad goal, usually qualitative, and it's going to answer the question, what will we do? Okay, typically for a quarter, but it need not be. It could be just for a month. For example, Intel does OKRs on a monthly cadence. Most do it on a quarterly cadence. But it's an example would be, let's say, for a marketing communication team, a digital marketing team, they might have a objective to delight customers with relevant offers and communications. But the key result is really where the action is in OKRs. These are the quantifiable statements that define the achievement of an objective. So key results answer the question, how will we know we've made progress? And an example for the same digital marketing team might be increase the email open rate from 15 to 20%. So when I started with Sears, I was doing OKRs coaching, and every session we would always start by reminding people, what are the keys to making OKRs effective? How do we write the key results in such a way that's going to be most effective? And what we would do is, I won't go over all of these, but I'll emphasize number 4, okay, results, not tasks, okay, because it's quite natural, and it can actually be good to begin by listing all of the things you want to do in order to say you've made progress on an objective. But once you've got that done, it's really important to convert these tasks into results by asking the basic OKR coaching question. What is the intended outcome of the task? So for example, a manager once had the objective to improve email marketing messaging. And the task at first was add 3 new fields to the marketing database. As we had a dialogue, we said, well, how would adding 3 new fields to the marketing database, what is the intended outcome of doing that? And we said, oh, well, that's to make more effective emails. Okay, well, how will we know we have more effective emails? And eventually we got to increase the email open rate to 20%. Now, before we introduce Holly here at Sears, our keynote speaker, I just want to emphasize that most of the OKR case studies that you'll see focus on startups, typically in the tech industry, and they tend to be centered around the Silicon Valley. But that's clearly not always the case. Okay, Sears is an organization that's in the retail space, not really a tech company, and the story that Holly's about to tell proves that it's possible to get started with OKRs even if you're a huge Fortune 100 organization. And so as you look at the presentation today, I want you to think about, why did Sears deploy OKRs? What was the impact of OKRs at Sears? And who sets OKRs at Sears? You're you're going to find that it's some 20,000 people or something like this that actually set OKRs at Sears. And how are OKRs updated and made visible throughout such a large organization? And finally, how does Sears ensure that OKRs follow best practices? So I'm very pleased to introduce today's keynote speaker, Holly Engler. Holly is currently the Manager of Organizational Effectiveness and the Chief of Staff and Human Resources at Sears Holdings Corporation. She has led the transformation of performance management and the implementation of OKRs at Sears Holdings Company. And she holds a graduate degree in industrial organizational psychology. She's passionate about innovation in HR, personal effectiveness, and the evolving world of work. So with that, I'm now going to change screens over to Holly. So take it away, Holly.
Thank you, Ben. Let me get my presentation up here. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep, looks good from here.
Great. So I'm really excited to be here talking with you guys about our OKRs journey here at Sears. My name is Holly Engler again, Manager of Org Effectiveness and Chief of Staff for HR at Sears. So I've been with the company for about 2.5 years now and have been privileged enough to lead our work in redesigning performance management, which has also included our implementation of OKRs. So I want to share with you guys today what our journey to OKRs has been, how we're currently utilizing them across our businesses, talk a little bit in detail about our change management approach and some of the organizational ownership and challenges that we face in implementing OKRs, and then also share with you some of the best practices and things that we've learned that might be beneficial for those of you considering utilizing OKRs in your business as well. So let's start out from the beginning. So in the summer of 2013, our chairman and CEO had passed along a link to the Google Ventures video, which is out there. You can go to Google and search for it and find it, to our talent management team. He loved the idea, he loved the concept, and asked us to implement something to get started with our OKRs journey. And so within 3 weeks, we had built a quick homegrown tool, something that we could use as a pilot and start testing across the organization. And so we knew we needed to act quickly. So we quickly started on our research and understanding what are OKRs, how are they used, how are we going to implement them here at Sears. So of course the Google Ventures video was available. We also looked into a lot of the work and advocacy that John Doerr had done. OKRs.com was a valuable resource, and Ben and his partnership and understanding what other organizations are doing in this space and how to really drive quality with OKRs. And then, of course, there's a number of other companies that are already utilizing OKRs, groups like LinkedIn or Intel, Google, who most recently has been using them quite a bit. And so we wanted to understand what that looked like, what they learned, and what we could apply here at Sears Holdings. Here's a look at what our original tool looked like. So fairly simple, able to go in and enter up to 5 objectives, up to 4 key results per objective. You could look at them quarter over quarter. And so this was just a quick and dirty way for us to get them in a platform within our social media site internally to have the visibility with the OKRs.
Yeah, just a quick question for you there on that, actually, Holly, that came in from our speaker or from our attendees. Given that there are lots of dedicated OKR tools out there, why did you build your own OKR tool versus just using one of the off-the-shelf tools?
That's a good question, Ben. Of course, we were kind of under the wire to get something done very quickly, but we also wanted something that was going to be highly customizable and something very specific to our processes. We knew when we started launching OKRs that we were looking at redesigning our entire approach to performance management, which would include a whole other set of tools and processes like a feedback tool, that we wanted to build internally anyways. And so this was one way that we could ensure we had, the proper collaboration between these softwares to really work together in our broader approach to performance.
Okay, thanks.
And so here's a look at the latest iteration where we have complete alignment all the way up to our enterprise mission and key results and complete transparency and visibility across the organization. Also very user-friendly so that associates can go in and enter and rate their OKRs. But as Ben mentioned, there's a lot of other companies that are offering off-the-shelf OKR softwares now, and many of them are very great user experiences, very functional, and very easy for associates. So why were we even considering OKRs? Well, we're a very large, very old company in transformation. We are always looking for ways to learn and innovate. We're looking for greater efficiencies and effectiveness. And of course, I think as every company does, we want to deliver results. We wanted something that we knew we could directly align to our broader talent management philosophy, which really relates to how we create tools that are designed for associates to help them improve their productivity at the individual level, rather than looking at talent processes that are designed just for managers and leaders in the organization. So a couple of highlights that OKRs gave us was that it would provide greater insight into what associates were working on and the progress that they're making on those objectives. Particularly for us at Sears, this is really important because we have a very distributed leadership model across the organization. OKRs also provide greater visibility and accountability to key priorities in a fast-paced and dynamic environment. Things are always changing all the time. In our traditional and previous goal-setting process, we set them annually and really worked the entire year. We thought we were working all year on those priorities, and we know that things change so many times throughout the year that it's hard to keep focus and understand truly what kind of progress you're making until you get towards the end of the year prepping for that annual review. We also wanted to create a platform for associates to work more efficiently networking across the organization, and the transparency of OKRs does that for us to drive greater effectiveness in delivering results by collaborating both within and across business units. So we got the tool set up and running, and we decided to start with a pilot with our executive team. So in Q2 and Q3 of 2013, we piloted OKRs with 38 of our business unit leaders, and we leveraged Pebble, which is our internal social networking platform, to draft and share OKRs. So initially they had an opportunity to practice writing OKRs, thinking about going through the thought process to think about how they kind of narrowed down their objectives into actionable pieces for that quarter, and then shared them with other business unit leaders. Some of the things we learned from that pilot is OKRs did in fact provide us a level of transparency that we had not had in a previous process. It allowed for our associates to benefit from greater visibility to all organizational objectives, not just their particular business unit. It also allowed our associates to react quicker and change their course of business and objectives when things changed even within a quarter. They provided greater alignment in our large and complex organization to align individual accountabilities to broader organizational outcomes. And it did fundamentally align more so with our approach for reinventing performance by creating associate-facing tools that drove individual productivity. So how are we using OKRs at Sears Holdings? In August of 2014, we formally moved away from traditional performance reviews and launched something we call Performance Enablement, which is our approach to performance here at Sears. And it consists of a set of tools and processes that help our associates deliver more value every single day by aligning their work and development with the strategic priorities and culture of our company. And performance enablement is really founded in 3 core tools. OKRs, which is setting, what is it that we're working on, what progress are we making. Soundboard, which is a feedback tool we developed internally to help us get feedback all the time about how we're achieving those outcomes. And a quarterly check-in process where managers and associates meet on a regular basis to talk about the progress they made on their OKRs and align on new OKRs for the new quarter. So we made this big shift from setting goals at the beginning of the year and not touching them until the end of the year when we did our traditional performance review process to OKRs, which allowed us to be a little quicker and also a little more dynamic and fluid with our goal-setting process. So we knew that in the annual goal-setting process, you set them at the beginning of the year, and then you really had no end in sight. It was 12 or 15 months until you came back to revisit them. And that seemed like a long time away, and there was a lot of steps in order to get to that achieved outcome. It was hard to determine, what your successes were between those points, and it was hard to see outside of just your individual focus and organizational outcomes. OKRs, in contrast, allow us to look at our goals on this quarterly cadence, which really allows us 3 months is a nice sweet spot where you can say, what is it that I need to achieve in the next 3 months? And I know what it looks like when I've achieved success. It's fewer steps to get to the next milestone in your broader progress. And it's insight. It's something that you can continuously stay focused on.
Yeah, and Holly, just on this slide, a question that came up is sort of twofold. I mean, number one, does Sears still have annual goal setting, or is it all quarterly? And then also, what is the difference between OKRs versus, let's say, an annual goal setting process that's just fractioned into quarterly?
Great question. So we eliminated our traditional annual goals. We do still have an extra layer in there that we call individual priorities, which really are just a way to create the transparency and visibility in the tool to broader outcomes and buckets of work, essentially. So big projects or key areas of focus, or the scope of your role in terms of bodies of work that you might be leading. And we use those to help inform our OKRs. So it is different than annual goals in that your priorities represent just kind of your buckets of work, and those can change dynamically throughout the year. So if your role changes, you get a promotion, you take on a new team, business strategy changes, you can update those and align those accordingly with your OKRs, and they really just help to guide your OKRs.
Okay, great, thanks.
So we see some pretty consistent usage. We do have kind of an opt-in approach. We don't drive OKR completion with compliance. We don't force everybody to do it. It's actually been very interesting in terms of implementation in our journey to understand who will optionally use these tools because they understand the personal benefit to themselves. So quarter over quarter, we see anywhere between 60 and 77% almost of associates who voluntarily go in and utilize OKRs to set their personal objectives for the quarter, which I think is really great. This is across an audience of about 20,000 salaried associates that we have here at Sears Holdings. Another thing that we look at is just the pure volume of objectives and key results. And this is informational data. When you have something like an OKRs methodology, you really create a ton of data that gives you insights into what is happening across the organization. So this is definitely an area that we're interested in and continuing to explore what we can do with this data. One of the things we look at is just the pure volume. So you can see here, in Q3 of 2015, across our 20,000 salaried associates who entered OKRs, they had 44,440 objectives and close to 125,000 key results documented. And that gives us a lot of data to go back and understand what's happening across the business, where there might be areas of opportunity for collaboration and those sorts of things.
So, I mean, Holly, this is really interesting data. I mean, it's pretty vast, like you said, and it's really interesting to see that in the Q3 2015, you can tell it's about 3 key results per objective. So a couple questions came up here. Number one, I mean, is this just interesting data, or are we doing anything with it? And then also, can we make any conclusions about, the number of objectives or the number of key results per objective that are actually being used?
Great question. So we haven't done too much prescriptively with operationalizing anything as a result of this data. We do utilize this to help inform, tool enhancements and the technology and understanding, like I mentioned, with this much work going on, in contrast to the previous process where you knew work was happening but you didn't know, you couldn't quantify it. This allows us to go back and utilize this data to then go back to the actual tool and say, okay, are there system enhancements that we can make to help drive collaboration across the teams, to help understand maybe what the sweet spot is for the number of OKRs or what types of OKRs you have to really drive business results and the greatest personal productivity with individuals utilizing the tools.
Yeah, and I mean, if nothing else, it's interesting to look at that one data point where it looks like the objectives are going down, but meanwhile the key results are going up. And so this could have all sorts of interesting implications for best practices and focus and so forth. Really, really good data. Thanks so much.
Absolutely, yeah, this feeds into a whole slew of other data. This is just kind of the first layer. And our associates continuously tell us that they love this process. So we go back very often and do focus groups and feedback sessions and ask people to share their experiences, which we find is really helpful in helping others understand how they can benefit from the tool. So often what you see, and what's interesting to me is you see a vast array of leadership positions here. So anywhere from divisional vice presidents to territory HR managers to individual contributors who are all utilizing this process to drive greater efficiencies in their work, and finding that it helps them gain clarity and focus, accountability and transparency. A lot of people tell us that it really helps as just a framework for stepping outside of the whirlwind of our every day-to-day business and pausing for a moment, taking a deep breath, and looking at their progress and looking at what they need to be working on next quarter to continue making that progress. And we do hear people tell us that they benefit from stopping and focusing in several times a year rather than just once a year.
Yeah, and just to chime in here, I mean, what I thought so interesting about this slide is how many different titles you'll see are finding value from OKR. So it's clearly not an executive thing only. It's really spread throughout the entire organization. And that last quote on the bottom there from the manager, it says, determining how I will grade my OKRs as I write them allows me really to think about what I want to achieve and how to craft a great OKR. That one particularly resonates with me because when I was doing the coaching with people at Sears, that was pretty much at the end of our session. We would do a key takeaway. What is it that you really got out of this session? And I would say it was about 80 to 90% of the time we did that. One of the key takeaways was putting in those scores at the time of creating the key result. There's so many benefits here. It makes it more measurable. It gets us to really think about what is the stretch level versus what we know we can do. And we'll cover that a little bit later, but I just want to emphasize that's really interesting to see that quote.
And we have a lot of associates that are continuously asking us to do even more with OKRs, which I think is a testament to the value that they're already finding in even just this fundamental approach or thought process around quarterly objective setting. Some of the things that we hear people ask us for is if we can extend OKRs to all of our associates. So currently we use them for our 20,000 salary population. We do have several requests in to extend it to our hourly, even our retail store associates who are in the store serving our members in our Sears and Kmart locations to help them also narrow in and focus on their sales metrics and customer service metrics. We've also been asked if we can more closely and technically integrate OKRs with our soundboard feedback tool so that it is more accessible for associates to request feedback around their progress on a particular objective. We've been asked if we can incorporate Covey's 4 disciplines of execution to help with writing better OKRs. So Covey talks a lot about, X to Z by when format, and that is a great framework that you can layer in here that we've used in several parts of our business to help drive more measurable objective setting. We host continuous workshops around quality OKRs and helping associates align their OKRs appropriately, and we continuously are asked to develop even more workshops to reach more audiences and help people and support them in doing this. And then, of course, you saw that we've already started creating, some awesome data as a result of this process, but really getting to that quality component. What is a quality OKR? How do we measure the quality of our objectives and our key results?
Another question coming in for you, Holly. Is Sears using OKRs for the individual or also the department level, or is it both?
Great question. So using them at all levels, and we really, really, really strongly drive it as an individual productivity tool. So we utilize our quarterly check-in process to talk about them at the team level and make sure that they're appropriately aligned to team business outcomes. And then the individual associates write them and rate them for themselves. But we absolutely use team objectives as well to kind of guide our personal objectives over the quarter. And interestingly enough, we see a lot of people even translate this into kind of a weekly team focus where everybody brings their individual OKRs in a weekly or biweekly standing team meeting and discusses them and uses this as their foundation for measuring progress as a team or a business unit as well.
Okay, and then when we say 5 objectives and up to 4 key results for each objective, is that for each team or is that actually for each individual?
That's for each individual.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep. Let's talk about some of the change management and organizational ownership in terms of implementing OKRs here at Sears. The world hates change, and yet we know it's the only thing that has brought us progress. So we knew very well going into this that we were not going to get everybody to do this day one, right out of the chute, and get everybody to understand and jump on board. So we very closely followed this change curve in that we understood we'd have people that would jump on the bandwagon right away. We also had some people that we would need to continue with the change management and get them on board, utilizing our early adopters to really share their best practices and experiences in order to help encourage those others to use them. So we came up with a set of materials, and this is a list of the materials that we put together internally that we shared out to the organization to help associates understand and facilitate this change process. We had an OKR video, which was just a short, I think it was a 2-minute, 30-second video that just got people excited, and it explained what OKRs were, how they're important, why they're important, how to utilize them, and really just get people pumped up about this change. The OKR reference guide was a document that we made available to all of our associates that illustrated specifically how you input and rate OKRs from a technical standpoint, but also reinforced the importance, highlighted some of the FAQs that we leveraged and questions that we had gotten during our pilot to help get in front of some of the challenges associates may have faced or questions they may have had. And it provided very business-specific examples of well-written OKRs. And this was one of my biggest takeaways in the entire implementation, was especially for Sears, where we have lots and lots and lots of different types of businesses, operational and support businesses, that the more specific you can get in your descriptions and your examples with individuals about how their OKRs can be utilized for their specific business or specific bodies of work was really important. So we utilized this quick reference guide to help with that.
Yeah, and just to chime in really quick, we will actually be able to email you out the OKR quick reference guide, the actual reference guide used at Sears, as inspiration for you to create your own if you're implementing OKRs. In order to get that, simply email carter@okrs.com, and we will make sure to give you that reference guide, as well as a couple of these other things. We're going to send out the OKR video. It's a link to the short video that Holly just described. You could probably just Google OKRs Sears video and find it yourself, but we'll also send you that link. Again, your key point of contact after this webinar is carter@okrs.com. All right, you can continue, Holly. Thanks.
Thank you. We also had strong leadership communication happening throughout this implementation. So our chairman and CEO was a very strong supporter of OKRs. Given that he had brought it to our organization, it helped that he was, advocating for this process change. And so he would outline his personal OKRs, shared them with his leadership team. Of course, they were transparent in the system. And he spent a lot of time articulating why they are important, utilizing our internal social media platform to really drive that change. Having some reporting in place was really critical for us at the very start of this so that we could quickly collect data and provide insights on user adoption and who was utilizing them and who wasn't, but also to understand who we could leverage for best practices, user testimonials. So the data piece is really important to this. We have our Office of OKR Management, which is made up of a decentralized team of SMEs across the business, like our HR generalist groups, and some really strong users out in the business who are available for training and coaching. We host workshops, information sessions, new hire onboarding sessions, and any technical assistance that we may have with the tools. So they're very targeted interactions with like-minded folks. We get groups of businesses together, whether it's a staff meeting or a specific segment of adopters. We may take people who are really strong adopters of OKRs and are doing them every quarter, and we'll host a session on how to write better quality OKRs or how to support your direct and indirect teams on utilizing OKRs. Whereas with some of our new hire groups or people who have not used OKRs as consistently, we'll host sessions on what are OKRs, what's the value in OKRs, how do you do them. So we're continuously hosting those. That work certainly does not stop at launch day. That's something that you've got to continuously keep up in order to continue to drive the process. And then we did have an OKR coaching deck that demonstrates the successful implementation of OKRs, the change management, the best practices, and encompasses some of these resources and tools to use as you're rolling out OKRs in your organization. Here's a look at some of those guides that Ben mentioned would be available for you guys. And I think the message here is really that these are quick and easy resources to put together that are specific to your business that really help to articulate what the purpose is and how you utilize OKRs You'll see on the right-hand side, we give some description around how to self-rate them, what those ratings mean, what happens to those ratings, to help alleviate any concern about what happens to these numbers once I put them into the system, but really helps to reinforce how I use them as a personal productivity tool, and they're designed for me. Some other tidbits with regards to our organizational change and things that we did to help implement this across the company was utilizing an enterprise end-of-quarter communication. So about 2 weeks ahead of the end of every quarter, we send out some centralized communication from our SHC communications team, reminding associates that we're nearing the end of the quarter, and it's time to start thinking about the progress that you've made this quarter and progress that you'd like to make next quarter, reflect on anything that you learned about your progress, and get ready to gear up for the new quarter. We utilize that end-of-quarter communication to also share any new testimonials, any new insights we have about the data and their effectiveness, or enhanced functionality that we have inside the tools. We also utilize system-triggered notifications, so helping to kind of remove the HRG or even the manager as the person who's consistently sending the communication about this message and really driving it. We utilize the technology to help nudge associates in a very positive way to utilize the tool and to understand where they have even greater efficiencies in adopting the tools. We include personalized insights to help motivate associates to think about things for the new quarters or beginning to draft their OKRs. We do still then also rely on the manager and the HRG to help socialize this within their business unit and to support our business unit leaders and our senior leadership team in having the resources they need to help drive this down throughout their business. And of course, we still have centralized talent management communications that we utilize from our talent and analytics team to help associates understand how this is integrated with other processes. And this was a big key takeaway for us in that we've got several tools and resources and processes in the talent management space, and we really wanted to make sure that we worked hard to help associates understand that OKRs are not an isolated and exclusive tool from all the rest of our talent processes. It's important that they understand how that feeds into other things like performance management, feedback that you're receiving regularly, and how you incorporate those pieces to really drive greater productivity. Some things we've learned. We've taken a look at some of our pre- and post data with the implementation of OKRs. And what we find is really, really encouraging and really interesting data is that associates who continuously set objectives. Now, this isn't taking into account any quality component even. This is simply looking at associates who stop at the end of each quarter, take a deep breath, reflect real quick on what they achieved in the previous quarter and what they're looking at for the next quarter, translating business priorities into individual objectives and key results, aligning with your team. When you're doing that regularly, we see associates, compared to associates who don't utilize OKRs at all, are 11.5% more likely to improve their performance an entire level year over year. This is the difference between an associate being just a middle-of-the-road kind of core performer and somebody who our leadership team would say is a top performer, somebody that we want to have replicate their performance across the business.
And Holly, this is another question that's coming up. Is there any evidence that this use of OKRs is improving the bottom line at Sears overall financially or market performance?
That's a great question. I think it's very difficult to translate an individual productivity tool to an entire company's business performance simply because there are so many variables that need to be taken into account for that. What we're seeing at the individual level is very encouraging, and we would hope that individual performance would translate into organizational performance, but we don't have any direct correlations to broader company initiatives. What we do find is that this is an important start for us, and we know that this is just one tool in an entire set of tools that associates can use to help us to achieve those broader organizational outcomes.
Yeah.
The translation in the alignment and knowing that we're getting better at the quality piece and understanding, are these the right OKRs that we need to be working on to achieve that business outcome is really important for us.
Yeah, that's the big picture, component of it. I mean, it's impossible pretty much to say, did OKRs, impact the bottom line for the overall, Sears organization. Although we did have that one anecdotal research, right, where one particular team set OKRs and then was able to improve the bottom line 8.5%. We wrote a little blog about this based on a fairly small data set, but it was enough to be statistically significant. And it was very encouraging because it's probably the first study, even though it's informal, that shows that OKRs can impact the bottom line, simply the use of OKRs for one quarter, month-over-month improvement financially. The fine print on that is we did a little follow-up study to look at, did the quality of the OKRs that were set have any impact on the impact to the bottom line in terms of revenue targets? And in fact, no, it did not. So far, all we know is just simply the act of setting OKRs seems to improve performance. We can't make any conclusions, even with small amounts of data, that say actually writing good quality OKRs makes a difference. And again, this is a very small data point, but it's probably the only data point out there that I've seen anyway that shows that OKRs can impact the bottom line positively. Most of this, and I think this study that we're seeing Holly show here, is probably the most encouraging argument for using OKRs, because the way I'm interpreting it is, hey, if you do OKRs consistently, you're pretty much more likely to be a candidate for promotion. That's how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah, and it's great messaging to go back out to the business too, from a marketing standpoint and change management perspective, and say, hey, if you had a tool that took you, call it less than an hour, a quarter to do, and could significantly increase your chances of improving your performance and potentially your opportunities to move up in the organization, would you use it? And of course, the answer is yes, certainly. I think the other important call out here is to think about, if you're going to be implementing OKRs at your organization, think about how you're going to do this type of measurement, a year, 6 months, a year, 2 years into your implementation. Having OKRs and having a digital tool for OKRs certainly sets you up to collect a ton of extra data. And so in places where you have very specific business metrics at the individual level, you will create the type of data that you need to run these types of correlations and understand the impact to your bottom line. So what makes a good OKR? Ben touched on this briefly at the beginning. He talked about results and behaviors, not to-dos. It's not meant to be a task list, but really what are the things that you personally can do to achieve those outcomes? They need to be measurable, and so we work with our teams on and go through that thought process when you're writing them. And a lot of this is kind of an iterative, nobody's going to get it perfect the first quarter that they do OKRs. It's something that you work on quarter over quarter and continue to improve. In fact, in our first couple of quarters, we found associates who would sit down to measure their OKRs in the second quarter would realize when they were trying to measure them that they hadn't written them in such a way that they could measure them effectively. So something that's definitely an iterative approach, but you need to emphasize that they do need to be measurable. They're meant to be ambitious, and they're meant to be stretch goals. So if you think you can improve NPS from 4.5 to 6.5, set your target for 8.5. We educate our teams a lot on how to interpret their learnings based on how they're rating their OKRs and how they utilize that information to set new OKRs. One of the things we share a lot of is if you're continuously rating your OKRs 1.0, then that's great, you're making great progress, but you probably aren't stretching yourself. So how do you stretch yourself a little bit more, and maybe you'll come in and rate your 7, which means you still stretch yourself and still made significant progress. They need to be actionable and time-bound, of course, very specific to what can I achieve in the next 3 months. They're individually created, but they're thoughtfully aligned to team or business or functional area objectives. They're, of course, transparent, and the technology helps. We leverage the technology to help create that transparency, so we're not old school communication to try to share out what these objectives are. 5 objectives and 4 key results per individual per quarter. So that helps to keep people very focused. In fact, we've had a handful of folks come back and say, but I've got 10 objectives this quarter, and I can only put 5 into the system. And we help to coach them around how to translate those into 5 very specific objectives that they want to achieve. They should be regularly reviewed, regularly updated. They change as your business changes and as needed. So your associates interact with the tools that you have today, and know that get into the tools regularly to view these so that they stay top of mind and top of focus. Best practices.
Just a quick question that's a quick question.
And entering your OKRs in the
quick question that's coming up is about that 10 objectives versus the 5 objectives. Is it the goal of objectives and key results to put in all of the work you're going to do this quarter, or is it the goal to just put in a certain key component of the work you're going to do in the quarter?
What a lot of our coaching, especially with our executive leaders, focuses on, because especially for individuals who have very large teams, you'll find that they have those objectives for the work that they're both personally doing and work that they're overseeing. And so the coaching helps to get them thinking about, what is the work that they're overseeing? What are they responsible or accountable for making sure happens? And then how do you translate that down into, what are more of your individual priorities or your buckets of work versus your personal objectives for work you are going to commit to this quarter that you can measure based on your behavior, translate some we're seeing into what might be objectives for others on your team. And that's where you find that team dynamic where people come and the leader may say, here's the things that I'm personally working on. Here's the things, the objectives that we need to focus on as a team. Now translate those into all of your individual objectives. And of course, with the transparency, you're doing some follow-up in your individual one-on-ones to make sure that that alignment is happening as well.
Okay, great. So it's not expected that 100% of the time in a given quarter I'm clearly working on a specific key result. It might be more like 70, 75% of the time, something like that.
Correct. OKRs in the first week of the quarter, and this is important in terms of creating the new habit on quarterly goal setting. The sooner you get them in, the sooner you can get working on it, and the more opportunity you have to make progress across the quarter. So if you're waiting until the second month of the quarter, you're not helping yourself in that you're not giving yourself ample opportunity to make progress on those. So we do ask them to draft and enter their OKRs in the first week of the quarter, align with their manager, and then review your OKRs regularly, whether it be at a standing team meeting. We see some of our associates set calendar reminders to just go back into the tool and check in on their progress, make sure they're still aligned and working on the right things throughout the quarter. And of course, the transparency is key to that. One of my favorite OKR tips, and this is what I'll kind of close us up with as you think about our next steps and continuously developing the quality around OKRs, is really thinking about how you grade your key results when you write them at the start of the quarter. So identifying how you're going to measure success at the end of the quarter helps you to write better, more clear, more actionable, more measurable OKRs. So in this particular example, the objective might be something like drive positive associate engagement to improve average mystery shop results from 71 to 80. My key result might be something like commence the pilot rollout of the engagement pulse survey by 6:30, which initially, without any kind of leveling, you might think is either I did it or I didn't do it, 1 or 0. We're able to break that down and measure the progress by identifying when I write it that I'll rate myself a 1 at the end of the quarter if the pilot's complete and I've shared the results. I'll rate myself a 0.7 if the pilot's complete but I haven't shared any results yet. I'll rate myself a 0.5 if the pilot's been initiated and it's in progress. I'll rate myself a 0.3 if the pilot's ready to launch and a 0 if the pilot has not been initiated. And what I love about this example is you'll find that the associates who are in operational parts of the business who have very specific, sales metrics or NPS metrics, initially will have an easier time writing their objectives and their key results because they're using their metrics as a foundation for that. Where you'll see people struggle a little bit more are people who don't have individual level metrics, who do more project-based work, and the application of OKRs to those associates is equally as important. And I think you can also drive a lot of quality in helping them to understand what progress and what success looks like in project-based roles by having them look at it from this perspective and think about how they're going to rate their progress, not just did you do this or did you not do this, like you would in a task list.
Yeah, and I'm just going to share a little story here because this is such an important development, and one of the questions that's coming up is how do we get more horizontal alignment across teams? And this story actually tells quite a bit, and it has to do with how we used OKR scoring to make a key result much more actionable and expectation set, and also allow horizontal alignment. So it's back to that example of the 3 fields to the database. And when I said, well, why do we want to add these 3 fields to the database? And they said, well, actually, we can't add the 3 fields to the database. It's really something we want IT to do. So this is common when let's say you're in the marketing team and you feel like your hands are tied because those 3 fields are not added to the database, and so you can't do it. All you can do is give the requirements to the IT team for the 3 fields to be added to the database and try to get it on their calendar. So the point 3 becomes literally that. Provide the 3 fields requirements to the IT team to get them loaded to the database. It sounds more like a task, and this is where the task and result continuum of OKRs kind of comes to a head. But when we ask deeply, but really, why are we trying to do that? Oh, we're trying to send better emails. Ultimately, let's say we're trying to get more revenue per email sent or a higher target open rate of 20%, like I said earlier. That becomes the 1. So the stretch target is something that's exciting. It gets people fired up. Like, I want to work here because we want to get that revenue per email up by 10%. That's going to be something that even the CEO will be excited about. But the point 3, put the fields in the database, isn't that exciting. But what it forces is a conversation between the digital marketing team and the IT team to say, hey, this is my point 3. It's just to submit the fields. And now maybe IT comes back and says, well, we can get one of those fields in, next week. But the other 2, forget it. They're not happening until next year. There's a lot of work involved. Oh, okay, well, now I can set my stretch goal, let's say, to, a 3% increase in open rate instead of a 10% increase in open rate, and that's maybe my stretch goal. And it just tells a better story of how we're working to drive that stretch target forward. So I just wanted to share that story because as we're thinking about the point 3 in this case, the best practices, what I can do, what I can achieve with minimal effort is really without the help from a bunch of other departments. So when you're writing a key result, it's perfectly fine for the 1 to be, very, very difficult to achieve and maybe requiring the help from other teams, assuming that everybody aligns horizontally. But the point 3 should really be, here's what I know we can do without a bunch of help from these other teams. And I guess that pretty much wraps up the webinar here. We're going into Q&A. I do have a couple questions for you here coming in, Holly, and that is, this is actually an interesting question. Why did we make OKRs optional, if you will, at Sears? And is it possible to be successful using an optional approach if there's an organization that's not used to having accountability? So there's a lack of accountability. I guess the question really is, can we really say we're increasing accountability if we make OKRs optional?
That's a good question, Ben. Selfishly, a little bit during our implementation, we wanted to do a more optional or opt-in approach to help understand really who were our true early adopters, people that were going to jump on board and do this without being told that they have to do it. We also wanted to see if that would change the quality of the OKRs, if the people who really were invested in utilizing this to help drive their personal productivity were doing it for those purposes rather than because their boss told them that they had to go do it, and if we would see any difference in the quality of the OKRs. So, after almost 2 years of this now, we are getting a little bit more prescriptive with especially our managers and leaders to say, your part of your role is to set objectives for your team and to help drive business outcomes, and so you really should be utilizing this tool. But we want the quality component to be there, and so it's important for us that we're also sending the message that, hey, you can use this or not use this, but know that the people who do utilize this are 11.5% more likely to improve their performance.
Right,
so
right,
you're kind of silly not to use it. And that works for us. It may not work for your organization, and if you need to go with more of a top-down, accountable, compliance-driven approach, then certainly I think that could work too. It's an interesting experiment, though, so I might recommend that you pilot it and launch it, maybe even with a smaller group of folks, with the opt-in approach. See who your true early adopters are, leverage those people in sharing the story internally, and then if you need to shift to a more top-down.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in on that too, and then we'll go into a wrap-up mode. But you have to be very careful about saying we're going to mandate some new OKRs tool for everybody in the company. In my experience, there's been a lot of pushback from that when I've tried to do that, especially when working with software solutions where you're starting to say everybody has a license, so you have to use it. In many cases, let's say, for example, a telemarketing team, that telemarketing team or a call center team, they may already have the equivalent of an OKR solution in place that's working very well for them. So they look at something like an OKR and they say, well, hey, we're already doing that, and it would be redundant for us to have to do it on a quarterly basis. We already do it every week, and here's how it's working. So that's why, again, I just say, yeah, be wary. It sounds good at first to say, hey, everybody in the whole company will set OKRs, right now, but you're going to get pushback if you do that in most cases. I guess that's just the human nature of it all. So now I'd like to go into a wrap-up mode, and I'm going to turn that over to Paul Niven to do that. Thanks so much, Holly, for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ben. A couple of important announcements before we close today. First of all, Ben and I are very pleased to announce that we're currently writing a first-of-its-kind OKRs book to be published by John Wiley & Sons in 2016. The title is OKRs Step by Step, and that's exactly what we're creating, a step-by-step guide for organizations that want to effectively implement and use OKRs. Ben and I are very committed to writing a book that's practical, hands-on, and will answer all of your questions in OKRs and ensure your implementation is really primed for success. So obviously we're very excited about the book, and you can look for that summer of 2016. Second, and related to the book, Ben and I have recently launched a new website, OKRstraining.com, which we're going to use to provide you with our latest thoughts on the topic, blog posts, excerpts from the book. And if you're in need of assistance with training or consulting with OKRs, we'll outline our offerings there as well. So we encourage you to check that out, OKRstraining.com. Well, once again, thank you, Ben Lamorte, today for joining us. Thank you, Holly Engler, for that outstanding presentation. And of course, thanks to all of you for listening. We hope you found the webinar helpful, and we wish you the best of luck with your OKRs. Bye for now.